Welcome, everybody, to the Crossing the Firewall podcast. I'm Tom Holt. I'm a professor in the School of Criminal Justice here at Michigan State University, and I'm also the director for the Center for Cybercrime Investigation. And I'm here with one of my co-hosts, as always.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Taylor Fisher. I'm currently a postdoc here at Michigan State University, and I'm a research associate with the center.
And we have with us a fantastic guest who has studied a lot of different forms of cybercrime. I'm going to allow him to introduce himself, and we'll jump right into the conversation.
Great. So thank you for having me. My name is David Decary-Hetu. There's really no good way of saying this in English. I'm a full professor at the University of Montreal at the School of Criminology. I have many hats, so I'm also the director of the ICCC, which is the biggest French-speaking research center studying criminology in general, I should say. I'm also the chair of the Division of Cybercrime of the American Society of Criminology, and I encourage everyone to look up the division, and we have a lot of awards and prizes and great people to meet at the division, so hopefully they can join us. And there's many other hats, but I think these are kind of the main ones for today.
Excellent. Well, we're glad you could join us. I've always been a fan of your work. You've been doing it for quite a while. And I wonder, how did you wind up studying cybercrime to begin with?
I was just fascinated by innovation ever since I was very young. And I think that cybercrime really shows innovation at its core. When you're looking at what hackers are doing, they're basically just taking something that really existed before, but they're twisting it around. They're finding new ways of using things. That's what happened with all the drug dealing and the dark web over the past decade. And looking into this, reading about this, I was just really fascinated by all this innovation, how offenders manage to get into these secure systems. And I was really curious to understand how they were doing it, why they were doing it. And that's what really drove me towards the study of cybercrime almost, 15 years ago now.
It's fascinating. It seems innovation gets all of us. Like we want to be part of that new wave of whatever's coming next, right? It's the challenge of something that's unknown. I find that very fascinating. And I can certainly say for me, it helped get me involved in cyber as well.
Yeah, and when I started looking at the dark web, that was the one thing that was really interesting. It's like, well, what is this innovation? How are people using it? Why are they using it? And that was the same thing for cryptocurrencies. So trying to understand, well, what is the role of cryptocurrencies within the criminal underground? How are offenders using cryptocurrencies? Why is it so important? So that's really fascinating to me, and that's what drove me into kind of this mad world.
Yeah, you've covered a lot of different topics over time. I know you've studied networks, you've done some stuff a long time ago, but looking at gangs and looking at hackers. Yeah. What's been kind of the main point of interest for you? You've mentioned innovation, but what's the thing that kind of moves you from topic to topic?
Yeah, so to me, it's really the connection between technology and crime and trying to understand what is the impact of technology and crime. That's kind of been the main driver for all the grants that I've got in all the projects that I've been working on for the past 10 or 15 years now. So I find that more and more technology is embedded without crime. It used to be that we could ask in surveys, how long were you online today? And that's not something that you can really ask people because we're pretty much online 24/7. And it's getting more and more difficult to find crimes where technology is not a part of. When we did interviews, for example, with people who are selling drugs, well, they now have mailing lists on WhatsApp and they're emailing their clients, sending newsletters. So all the crimes that you can think of, there's very often this technology component to it. And I've been trying to understand what is this component, what impact does it have, what role does it have, what would happen if we were to remove it. So these are kind of the questions that I've been pondering over the past decade.
And from your perspective, what do you think's been the most interesting innovation or sort of change as a result of technology in the time you've been studying cybercrime?
I think it has to be cryptocurrencies, even though you can love them or you can hate them. I think the biggest transformation that we've seen with crime has been cryptocurrencies, just because it really facilitated the payments for the criminal underground. So we see a lot of offenders buying and selling illicit goods and services. And it used to be that they would use, these online virtual currencies, but these weren't really great. They could easily be taken down. And when the offenders decided or realized that they could be using Bitcoin, and now there's new cryptocurrencies, this really opened up a brand new world for them. And when we're looking at corporations now, what we're seeing with ransomware, it would really not be so easy for ransomware to be so efficient if there were no cryptocurrencies, basically. So I think that cryptocurrencies really have a big impact on the criminal underground, and I would say many types of crime, just because of what they enable the offenders to do, basically.
So I know our listeners probably have heard of cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, Monero, and those kind of things, but they might not have heard of ransomware. Could you maybe give us a quick definition of what ransomware looks like and how it's tied to these networks?
Yeah, so it's kind of a moving target. So ransomware groups used to attack individuals, and they would say, we've encrypted all your files. If you want to get your files back, you're going to have to pay us $300. And because people were attached to their pictures, to their financial files, their taxes or anything, they would just pay the ransom, basically. And over time, collecting $300 from multiple individuals is kind of interesting, but it's much more interesting when you're collecting, for example, $10 or $20 million from a large corporation. So what we've seen is these ransomware groups move from targeting individuals to targeting large corporations. And in this case, they're able to get into these networks, encrypt all of the data, and then ask these companies to pay them millions of dollars in ransom. And if they do, then they get the decryption keys and they can get their files back. Over the years, companies got backups, so that wasn't really working all that well. So that's where these ransomware groups moved to this double extortion scheme, where they're actually encrypting the data, but they're also exfiltrating all the data from these companies. And then what they're telling the companies is, if you want to get your data back, we'll sell you the decryption keys. But if you also don't want us to release all of your secrets, you're going to have to pay us a ransom to make sure that we don't publicize all your, internal emails, confidential government secrets or emails or whatever. And so we're seeing kind of this double threat where these groups are actually charging you. So you get your files back, and so they don't disclose your information at the same time.
So it seems like if you pay it, they'll give it back. Like, it's a pretty trustworthy system, and I would imagine that works in their favor. Is that a correct interpretation?
To some extent. So some groups have been known to not offer decryption keys. Some of these groups have been very good at encrypting your data, but not so good at decrypting your data. And so, for example, my research center was hit with a ransomware attack probably 12 or 13 years ago. So in the early days of this ransomware trend. And once we decrypted all the files, we had to pay the ransom and everything. But once we paid the ransom, all the file names were gone. So when we recovered the files, that was great. But the problem is we didn't have any names for all these files. So we had thousands and thousands of files. And, if you have, 200 spreadsheets in a folder, you have to open them up one by one, rename them, look at what's inside. So that was really time consuming. So in many cases, I think that things are working okay. But there's also a lot of stories about these ransomware groups actually keeping the data, reselling it, re-attacking the companies. So it's not as clean or as professional as one would hope, unfortunately.
So we know ransomware has been around for a while. What's gotten you interested in studying ransomware, given you've experienced it personally?
Yeah, so that was kind of an interesting kind of experience, just going into the streets, meeting someone on the street corner, giving him a few $100s, getting the Bitcoins, the ransomware group. So that was kind of an interesting experience to do a while back. But I think that the ransomware problem is possibly the biggest threat that corporations are facing today. These ransomware groups are extremely active. They are very disruptive. We've seen companies being down for weeks, for months. The cost of managing an attack of a ransomware group is extremely expensive. And so what was the interest for me is the fact that this is so disruptive. This is so significant. It's something that we need to understand. And because companies are very wary of their reputation, they're very cautious about what they disclose when they've been attacked. There's not that much data about these ransomware attacks. And so I thought it was really interesting and important for us to kind of do some research and try to better understand this phenomena that is attacking so many corporations all over the world right now.
What fascinates me too is with the kind of group or network mentality, we're shifting into this like ransomware as a service model. And my first exposure to ransomware was through the darknet and seeing it being sold. And so learning that, these are prepackaged units that you don't have to be a coder, you don't have to be a programmer to know how to do these things. And so it's really opened up the possibilities of who can be targeted, why they're being targeted, which, it could be individualized to the group, could be, if it's for an activist reason, or maybe they're going after hospitals because they know they need their data back quickly, whatever it may be. But it seems like that ransomware as a service model where now I don't have to be a really good programmer to engage in these types of crimes is really making it a wider net.
And you have to understand that if you're a ransomware group somewhere in Russia, for example, and I was to tell you, well, you have to attack a bank, for example, in Germany. Well, if you don't speak German and if you don't know the country, which bank are you going to target? Even if you manage to get it within their systems, how are you going to navigate around? I mean, you don't know the name of the files, you don't understand the language, the operating system. So very often what you'll need is, boots on the ground, people in Germany who speak German, who know these companies, who know whom to attack, and they'll be able to navigate themselves much easier once they get in and once they breach these companies. So this ransomware as a service really is significant because it enables these groups to attack targets in countries all over the world and being able to be very efficient because they're going to have people who know the lay of the land, who understand who to target, how to move around within their systems much more efficiently if they were to do it themselves. And that's kind of the big game changer. And we've seen in Canada, for example, where I'm from, many Canadians working within the scheme, collaborating with people in Russia and other countries to launch ransomware attacks against Canadian targets.
Now that's a surprise, given we hear so much about it being Russian actors or these sort of networks of networks where this is our reconnaissance team, this is our programming team, this is our negotiation team, these sort of splits of behavior. So how does the local nexus fit in?
So it's very often it's going to be to provide the kind of the initial access, so enabling the team to get in. And so these people are going to try and find targets, they're going to try and get into these systems, and then they're going to connect kind of the mothership with this target, and then they're going to say, well, we're in, we have this beachhead that's been established, now we can attack them, and then these groups can actually negotiate with the victims for the ransom once all their files have been exfiltrated and their data has been encrypted. So it's kind of a two-step approach to this problem.
So what keeps coming to my mind while we've been talking about this is how they're initially getting into the system, right? So if you have someone boots on the ground that's already part of that bank and they're maybe a disgruntled employee, great, then they can give you access. But, is it as easy as sending a phishing email and hoping somebody falls for it? Or are there more sophisticated ways of going about it?
There's many ways. I think just, the sending malware by email is still big. It's still a thing. So, trying to get someone to open a file, trying to get someone to click on a link is always going to be something that's working very well. There's also more and more with the pandemic, we had a lot of people working from home. So we see a lot more attacks also using remote desktop. So basically trying to get into computers just by remote desktoping into them and then from there kind of deploying to the corporate network. So I would say that probably these are the two main ways that people get in, just, email compromise and attacking remote desktops that are easy to get in, either because there's a vulnerability or because, there's just an easy password to guess.
And in terms of the targets, we know some groups are going after hospitals, some are going after certain kinds of organizations. Is there a rhyme or reason to targeting, or is it just simply whatever you can get in is fine enough?
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be any direction or anything. These groups seems to be very opportunistic. You're going to find maybe some politically motivated groups, but in most cases, it's just going to be whatever they can get in. And, it's easy to make connections after that, saying, oh, they're targeting that industry or that country. But when you're looking at the list of people that have been compromised, it seems really difficult to find any trend in there. Sometimes the groups are going to pivot from one company to another that are connected to each other. But very often it just seems almost random, I would say.
So we've talked about the notion of ransomware. When I hear the phrase ransom in and of itself, I always think of negotiations. I think of like Man on Fire and movies like that. And one of the things that we don't really talk about, at least in the academic literature, is that negotiation process. So walk us through a little bit of that.
Yeah, sure. So basically there's usually with these ransomware groups, a page where the victims can connect to, and then they have a direct chat with an operator who's going to be negotiating the terms of the ransom. So it's been really interesting because some of these chats have leaked online, and some people have been aggregating all of these chats together. And so for one of the research projects that we did, for example, we collected all these chats and we did some qualitative analysis to try and understand how do these unfold, how do these people communicate. And it was really interesting to kind of see the trends into how these people communicate and kind of the tension, the emotion. And, these companies are going through hell and they're trying to make it out of it without having to pay tens of millions of dollars. And so we tried to kind of understand through one of the projects that we did how the offenders and the victims communicate and how they're each kind of pulling at each other, trying to get the most out of this conversation, basically.
And what'd you find?
Yeah, so basically there's a lot to tell, but it was really interesting to see, first of all, that before the attackers would set a ransom, they would actually do some research on their targets. So they would try and look at the financial documents of the companies. They would actually try and see if they have cyber insurance, because that's a thing these days. And basically they would say, well, we've actually exfiltrated all of your, financial records. We have your policy. We know your insurance is going to pay up to $5 million. So we're asking for $5 million because that's what your, insurance policy is for. And so for the company, they know that it's not going to cost them anything or not that much. So they kind of, first of all, do some recon to make sure that when they're asking for a ransom, they're actually asking for something that makes sense for the target. We also see these negotiations unfolding, and we're seeing kind of these numbers go down quite a lot. So we're seeing, ransom being asked, for example, $2 million, and then very quickly it's going to drop to $1 million, then maybe $250,000. The attackers really seem more into kind of a numbers game, meaning that they're interested in getting kind of more ransoms rather than making sure that they get every penny out of each victim. Their goal is to say, maybe we should be getting $1 million from them, but if we get $500,000, that's going to be enough for us. So these victims, they're always trying to negotiate it down. They're asking for deductions, reductions, and they're usually succeeding in it, even though there seems to be a floor. And so even if you think, they're going to ask $2 million out of you, at some point there's going to be a number that they won't go under. Now, another thing that was really interesting is the ransomware groups would be offering many services. So basically, They're going to say that they're going to provide, for example, full decryption assistance. They're going to tell the victims, or they're going to prove to the victim that they've actually removed all of the data from their systems to make sure that there's going to be no leak on their end. These ransomware groups even offer security reports on the vulnerabilities that were found, and these are kind of interesting, but at the same time, looking at all the victims, they're pretty much kind of copying and pasting the same report to everyone. So either they use the same recipe to get into everyone's computers, or it's just something that they're just, giving to people just to, make them feel good. So they're offering many services, and then they're going to say, well, you can get, for example, $180,000 for decrypting your data. But then if you want us to prove that we've deleted the data we exfiltrated, it's going to be another $100,000. And then if you want to know how we got in, that's going to be another $50,000. So you have all of these kind of extras that tack on. These ransomware groups were also, I would say, quite violent in their threats. So basically, if the victim doesn't want to pay, then the attackers are going to go heavy on them. They're going to say that they're going to be sending, denial of service attacks. They're going to make sure that everyone knows all of their secrets. And they really put the emphasis, and they really try and scare you into paying. And they're making big threats. They're saying, even if you manage to recover everything, we're going to go back in and we're going to get access to your data once again. So there was a lot of tension with these threats. As something that we've seen before, they're always, pushing for urgency. They're saying, if you pay us now, then that's going to be this price. If you don't pay us this week, then the price is going to go higher next week. So they're always pushing kind of for urgency and getting the people to pay as soon as possible. Now, one of the kind of nugget that we got, because in all the research, there's always kind of one or two nugget that was really interesting, is in one of the chat, one of the attacker mentioned that once they were done exfiltrating the data, they realized that their victim actually had a branch that was operating in Russia. And so they were saying, oh, we're really sorry, we didn't know you guys were operating in Russia. As you know, we're not attacking people in Russia, so please excuse us. Don't tell anyone we attack you. We'll just decrypt everything for free. So kind of the loophole is like, if you can manage to set up like a subsidiary in Russia, maybe they will get you out of most ransomware groups. Now, that has not been tested, but I thought that was kind of interesting. And, that reminded me kind of a while back when I was reading some carding forums, and where the carders who were in the Western world were saying, you guys stop targeting your local banks. You should attack banks in Russia, because when is the FBI going to arrest you for hacking a bank in Russia? Never, And the Russian hackers are attacking us. And then they were discussing about how, if you want to do this thing and never get arrested, just target, banks in countries which are doing this to us and not doing the same thing. So that's this kind of loophole. And maybe a last thing, because I don't want to go too long, but all the victims were trying to play it small, meaning that, very often the person on the chat would be saying, my boss says it's my fault if we got ransomware. I have to pay the ransom myself. I've maxed out all my credit cards. I only have $13,000. I'm going to lose my job. My kids are not going to eat. You have to work with me here. I can't pay you $2 million. And so they're trying to, make it very personal, appealing to kind of the humanity of the attackers. And I thought that was kind of interesting. That really didn't seem to work too well. But that was another point that was interesting. So there's kind of a million kind of thing that we could talk about. But these are some of the things that kind of we saw, and that kind of describe kind of the environment, the shape of these negotiations, and how kind of these two negotiate these ransoms.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought up the urgency because that's such a common tactic in so many cybercrimes, right? We see it a lot with fraud and like romance fraud and things like that. But I remember specifically seeing in one of our trainings, we had brought up the WannaCry ransom, and they had an active timer right there saying if this goes to zero, your ransom's going up to $1 million or whatever it was, right? And so I can only imagine facing an actual timer. You're panicked, right? You're freaking out. You don't know what to do. You don't have the resources to handle this. But that kind of leads me to my question that I got my brain to finally figure out. Was at least here in the U.S., the FBI says don't pay the ransom, right? They're pretty standard across the board. They say it doesn't matter what it is, do not pay the ransom. However, that's easy to say when you have a team of negotiators ready to negotiate for whatever may need to be negotiated. So my question to you is, as you know, a general person being involved in maybe the higher ups of these companies, how can we help them respond better if the answer is don't pay the ransom, but we also don't have resources to help you handle it? Like, what can we do? How can we help these people?
So the good news is, regarding the exfiltration of data, we really haven't seen much coverage of data that had been exfiltrated. So, you know, when you go on these ransomware groups' websites, you see all these companies and there's links to download all of their confidential information. But if you've ever tried to do this, it's nearly impossible. I mean, it will take you very often 2 to 4 weeks to download these files because they're huge. The internet connection that you get from these guys is very slow. So even if your data was exfiltrated, the odds of it kind of being used against you appear to be fairly small, just because it's difficult to gain access to it, and it doesn't seem to be a thing yet. And I'm surprised that it's not a thing, but that's kind of the good news. Second thing is, I think you have to have prevention. I mean, you have to have very good backups. You have to have versioning of your data. And once you've been bit and once you've been hit with this ransomware, for example, our research center was around for 50 years and we had no backups. So what are you going to do? I mean, are you going to lose everything that you've ever done? No, you're going to pay the ransom. But after that, well, you kind of hope that you're going to have some good backups. And we were actually hit again, and at least we have backups to restore from. So I think kind of getting the message out that you need to invest in prevention, which is the same thing for public health, which is the same thing for cybersecurity. Investing in prevention really helps and is kind of the key to everything, because it's not going to be easy if you get hit and you haven't been prepared for this.
So I have two questions. One, we hear a lot about the overwhelming costs associated with ransomware, and obviously there's going to be costs in terms of repair, but also that ransomware groups are making hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in the aggregate. So if a group is really negotiating down from millions to hundreds of thousands, how do we account for that huge number of cryptocurrency dollars moving to ransomware groups? Is it that they're just hitting ones and ones and ones, or?
No, that was just one example, but I mean, there have been confirmed cases of companies paying 10, 20, 30 million dollars in ransom. So that has totally happened, and that's something that I wouldn't say is common kind of every day, but that's been known to happen. So there are a lot of $1 million ransoms, a lot of tens of millions of dollars ransom. So that's how you get to these numbers. Even though it's always hard to kind of really quantify how much money is going to these groups, blockchain analysis is perhaps more an art than a science in many ways. So you can get some interesting information, but it's really not all 100% reliable, that's for sure.
And in terms of the negotiation itself, kind of going back to this idea of a traditional ransom, did you see anything where groups were asking for essentially proof of life of data where, hey, how do we know that if we pay you, we're going to be able to decrypt file X or Y or Z?
So that was another really interesting point, is the ransomware groups would usually offer to decrypt 2 or 3 files from their victim just to prove that, exactly as you said, kind of this proof of life thing. And then you would see the victims just saying, it would be really great if you could decrypt just this database. We don't need the rest. Just decrypt this database and we'll figure the rest out. So that unfortunately kind of drew the attention of the ransomware groups toward that express, database, which appeared to be so important for the victims. But yeah, so you would actually get a few files back for free, and then, well, you just have to decide, do you ask for your crown jewel and maybe you're attracting too much attention to it, or do you instead kind of just ask for some random files so they don't know what they hold and what to look at, basically?
So we mentioned this very briefly a couple minutes ago, and this is more out of my ignorance to the topic. But we brought up cyber insurance and how it can have these sort of standards of, we'll pay up to XYZ for these different crime types, whatever. How important in today's world is it to have cyber insurance? And is it becoming a cost worthwhile for companies? Like, is it actually benefiting these companies in ways that is worth the cost? Because that seems to be the hitch, right? Is, well, this is just another, monthly payment I have to make. So is it something that's worthwhile? Is it something that we should be looking into?
Yeah, so that it's becoming more and more of a big business. More and more companies are getting this, just like they have insurance for their directors' liabilities. It's becoming something that's more and more becoming mandatory that you need to have, and you need to kind of hedge your risks and to make sure that you actually have someone who's going to be able to pay the millions of dollars in case of a ransom. And these insurance companies will often work with companies who have skilled negotiators. So that's another benefit, which means that it enables you to actually count on a team that will help you negotiate down the amount of the payment that you have to make, and it gives you another resource to draw from. So I would say that definitely we're going to see this more and more, and that's something that's going to be important.
And from a practical standpoint, if ransomware groups are consistently negotiating, then they must be pretty efficient at the process. What do you think guides them to a final dollar amount? Like, how do they determine this is our rock bottom price that we're going to accept?
That was not something that we could get to. We just didn't do interviews with some of these ransom groups people. That would be something that would be extremely interesting. I think that in criminology research, I've been guilty of this. It's very nice and very easy to go and get data online. These chats, we were able to access them, download them, and analyze them very easily and very effortlessly. But I think that we need to do a better job as criminologists of doing interviews with online offenders, to talk with them, to engage with them. And that's something that's still lacking, and that's something that's kind of bring down the visibility that we have and the understanding that we have of ransomware groups.
So on that note, and I'm just going to pick your guys' brains since you guys have been in this field so much longer than I have. Myself and a working group at USF had tried to reach out to hackers and ask them to take a survey, and we were fairly successful. We used ZoneH as the platform to do so, and we got a lot of pushback for incentivizing it. And so my question to you guys is, in this field of criminology where we regularly incentivize prison work, right, handling people that are incarcerated, how do we feel about it, right? How are we? Is it a justified cost? Is it okay to pay active offenders to answer our questions? Where do we stand on that?
I don't know if in the current climate we have millions of dollars to spend to pay on interviews. And so to me, it's always been a token kind of, or, just we'll give you $20, $50. I don't think it's going to change anyone's life. So I don't mind paying it if that's something that is needed, and if it greases the wheels and it helps get our point across and get interviews. I mean, why not? I don't think we're not paying thousands of dollars to these offenders, so it's really just kind of a nice gesture. And if it helps, why not?
Yeah, I'm of a mind that says payment's okay. It's just so hard with certain groups too. Like a hacker group may assume the worst of you if you're paying them, or may think there's something ulterior about your motivation to pay, which is weird, but hackers are, notoriously conspiratorial in thinking anyway. So I don't know. I would be curious, just on the topic of doing research in general. How did you get the chats that you got, and did you have to do any anonymizing, or was it just all out no matter what?
No, it was all out on GitHub. I should have the reference in front of me. I do not have it right now, but some great researchers just put it out there for the community, and yeah, so we I should be recognizing them right now, and I'm terribly sorry for not doing so. But if you Google it, I'm sure you're going to find it very easily. And these guys have done an amazing job of connecting these chats together. They're somewhere on GitHub.
Do you think there's any concerns that we should have? I mean, we talk about research ethics and things like that. If a data set like this is available and you have these sensitive conversations, then is it appropriate if it's already online that we just treat it as another data source, or do you think that we should be careful in using secondary data sets like this? I guess, I mean, I've done it myself, so I'm not criticizing in any way, just more asking the question from that kind of student perspective. Should we use this or not?
Yeah, I think we should be using it. I mean, why not? If it's out there, if it's public, I mean, if it helps us understand these problems, I mean, let's do it. And I don't think that in this particular case, we're hurting anyone or putting anyone at risk. You always have to ask yourself, what are the risks of using this data set? But in this case, I think it was pretty safe. But you're right that you always have to be careful. I would say the main risk usually comes from publishing this data, because most, all the company names were wiped out from these chats, so we didn't know, who we were reading about. We did find kind of one or two names that slipped by, but for most cases, they did a very good job of anonymizing these chats. But it's such a difficult job, so I would rather be the one downloading them and analyzing them than going through the work of cleaning them up, because that's always very risky and messy, and odds are you're going to make a mistake, basically.
So ransomware has been a problem for a very long time. Realistically, you can look at the late 2000s and find the earliest variants or, sort of origins of ransomware. So eventually there's going to be an end point. What do you see the end of ransomware being? Is it that just some new service replaces it, or what do you think will lead to the death of ransomware?
I honestly don't know. I've been asking myself that question, but I mean, it's just so difficult to secure your network all the time that bad guys are always going to go in. And if they're able to exfiltrate your data, more and more companies are getting good at backup, so that's less and less of an issue. But then you don't necessarily want your data floating around. So I would say that there's just no end in sight. Perhaps the only way of blocking ransomware would be to make it illegal to own and use cryptocurrencies. But given the current climate, I don't see that happening anytime soon. So basically, I would say we're just stuck with this problem, and I don't see any countermeasure or any ways that we could put in place that would be extremely efficient at stopping this ransomware problem, unfortunately.
I think it comes back to another central theme of our podcast here is that the human factor is always going to be the weakest link. If you can, train your employees, tell them, these are the risks, these are the downstream risks of, clicking on a phishing email or clicking on something you're not supposed to. I think that's our best bet at, preventing this large scale. I tend to believe that crime is never going to go away. It's just going to evolve into something else, right? And so I don't know if ransomware will ever be ended. But I think if we make it much more difficult on their behalf to be successful on it, then I think we're heading in the right direction. But again, we've been preaching that for years and years and years. So we'll see if it helps.
And so we're using more and more kind of the concept of resilience, which means that, everyone's going to be attacked, everyone's going to be penetrated, but then the question is, how resilient are you in the face of an attack? And I think that's kind of where you have to put your energy, and building systems and response plans and having the teams ready so that you are resilient in the case that someone does get in and something bad does happen.
So how do you see AI fitting into the stack for a ransomware operator? Is it that they're just going to automate a chatbot to do the negotiation for them, or how do you see AI fitting into the whole process?
Well, that's the huge hot topic in cybersecurity these days. I would say that the war is already ongoing, with AI being used to find vulnerabilities to get into systems, AI being used to find vulnerabilities in systems, but in order to correct them and to patch these vulnerabilities. So I would say that the race is really on in terms of finding ways to get in and patching ways of getting in. So this has been ongoing. It's going to continue to go on. In terms of communication, that could happen. Perhaps they're going to get their bot. And, if you use all these chats, and I believe, I may be wrong, but I think someone used these chats actually do a robot that would let you kind of practice or train in negotiating a ransomware ransom from both perspectives. So that could happen, but I think the biggest impact is going to come from trying a million different ways of getting into a company and testing all the ways that people could get in. So do some penetration testing proactively using these AI tools, basically.
It makes sense. It seems like AI scales up just everything it does, right? It just makes everything a little bit more efficient, a little bit faster. And now I can try the, 17 different vulnerabilities I know of rather than one at a time.
Yeah, and it's also a bit scary because people rely it on more and more. So, if I'm setting up a new web server and I go to ChatGPT and I ask it, how do I make this web server secure? It's going to tell me, to remove default passwords. It's going to tell me to do X, Y, or Z. But it's probably going to tell me one or two things that are wrong that will leave a glaring security hole into my system. So hopefully the people who are in charge of security don't only rely on these AI tools to know their job, basically.
So after all the discussion we've had today and all of your work on just cybercrime generally, what's the one thing that you think our average listener should take away from this conversation? What's the one thing that kind of sits at the top of the mountain that the average person should be aware of?
So I think that you have to know what your risks are, and you have to invest in prevention. You have to be able to respond quickly when there is an attack, because there will be an attack at some point. So you mustn't rely on the technological tools. For example, for individuals, many people are using these password managers these days. Well, how many people actually have all of their passwords printed somewhere and stored in a lockbox just in case that, the service goes down, something happens, they don't have access to their account anymore. Well, how do they get into all of these accounts? Well, at least have a backup of your passwords. And I'm going to ask both of you if you have these backups for your passwords. But I think that prevention is key, and trying to understand what your exposure is, what the risks are, and preparing for them is really key across the board. And if you invest a bit of time now, it's going to be so much easier if the worst happens. And, making sure you have your backups, you can get into your systems, that's going to be key. And I think that's where people need to focus right now.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I know personally I am lazy and have forgotten a password or two and had to look back at my phone to see, what was that password? Because I cannot tell you. Yeah, it's a perennial problem.
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, we're so glad you could join us. Is there anything that you want to plug before we head out? Anything you want to direct people to?
Yeah, so if you're interested by cybercrime, please do look up the Division of Cybercrime of the American Society of Criminology. It is a division full of extremely smart people who are interested by cybercrime research. We give out our awards every fall. We have the call open now for nominations for these awards. And it's really a big opportunity to just connect with like-minded people who are interested in cybercrime research. It's growing every year, very dynamic group. So please do look us up, join the division, and hopefully we can engage and continue this conversation around cybercrime.
And if you're planning to attend the American Society of Criminology meetings in November in Washington, D.C., there will be a division meeting, correct?
Exactly. So I think it's going to be on the Thursday. So it's a great way to just meet people in real life, because that's still a thing apparently. And come and chat with us, and very open people, and we'd be glad to shake your hand and talk about this stuff.
Excellent. Well, it was a pleasure to have you on. It was great to talk about this. We'd love to have you back and talk about some other issues. We know you have a ton of research on illicit markets and other processes, so it'd be great to get your feedback on some other areas. But yeah, thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us on this episode, and we look forward to having you with us the next time we cross the firewall. Thanks for listening to the Crossing the Firewall podcast. This is a production of the Center for Cybercrime Investigation and Training in the School of Criminal Justice at Michigan State University, produced by J.J. Thomas. The thoughts and opinions expressed are those of the hosts and the guests and do not necessarily reflect those of the university. If you have a comment or a question about the show, please email us at crossingthefirewall@gmail.com. Also, make sure that you follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn for more information. And if you're enjoying us on your favorite podcast app, please make sure that you like the show and leave us a review so that way everybody knows what we're up to. And if you're listening in on YouTube, make sure that you like us and subscribe so that way you're staying up to date on everything that is crossing the firewall.